Let's imagine an impossible experiment. In a single moment, all of Earth's oceans, the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern, and Arctic, somehow end up inside an ordinary glass bottle. It sounds like pure science fiction, but if we look at it from the perspective of physics, the consequences would be extremely interesting. First, let's understand the scale. Earth's oceans contain about 1.3 billion cubic kilometers of water. That is almost all the liquid water on the planet. If such an enormous amount of water were suddenly placed into a tiny bottle, we immediately face the biggest problem: pressure. Water is very difficult to compress. This means its volume cannot easily be reduced. If we try to squeeze the entire ocean into a small space, the water molecules would press against each other with incredible force. Inside the bottle, the pressure would become billions of times greater than normal atmospheric pressure. What would happen next? A glass bottle could not withstand even a tiny fraction of that force. It would instantly shatter into pieces. But that is not the most dramatic part. Once the bottle breaks, all that water would suddenly be released from an extremely compressed state. Imagine billions of cubic kilometers of water that were forced into a tiny space suddenly gaining freedom. It would behave like a spring that has been tightly compressed and then suddenly released. The water would begin expanding at an enormous speed. The energy released from this expansion could be comparable to the explosion of an enormous number of nuclear bombs. A massive shockwave would move through the atmosphere, destroying everything in its path. The air around it would rapidly heat up. Part of the water would instantly turn into superheated steam, forming a gigantic cloud that could rise high into the stratosphere. For a while, the sky might become dark because of the massive amount of water vapor and mist. But that would only be the first stage. After the explosive expansion, gravity would begin to pull the water back toward the surface of Earth. Eventually, the water would flow back into the ocean basins. However, this process would create catastrophic waves. These waves would be far larger than normal tsunamis. Their height could reach several kilometers. They would travel across the entire planet, flooding continents, destroying cities, and reshaping coastlines. The climate would also change dramatically. Because of the enormous amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, Earth could experience a period of extreme rainfall. Heavy storms might last for months or even years until the water cycle stabilized again. There is another interesting possibility. If we imagine that the bottle was incredibly strong and somehow did not break, the situation inside it would become even stranger. Under such enormous pressure, water could transform into unusual states of matter that rarely exist on Earth's surface. For example, it could turn into high-pressure ice, a form of ice that normally forms deep inside large planets. So instead of liquid water, the inside of the bottle might contain a solid mass of exotic ice. Even if the temperature remained relatively high, this thought experiment shows just how enormous Earth's oceans really are. They cover more than 70% of the planet's surface and store an immense amount of mass and energy. Any sudden attempt to compress them into a much smaller space would lead to a global catastrophe. So the simple answer is this: if all the oceans suddenly appeared inside a bottle, the bottle would not survive even for a moment. And the result would be one of the most powerful explosions imaginable on our planet. And it reminds us of something important. The ocean is not just water. It is a massive planetary system that shapes climate, weather, and life on Earth. Even in our imagination, it's something that must be handled with care. What do you think about this? Write your thoughts in the comments.